Yes, guys, what is up? You've come back again. It's great to have you here for yet another episode of the Off Grid podcast. Before this episode, I just want to say we've got over 100 subscribers on Spotify and over 100 subscribers on YouTube, which is just amazing. We've hit the full century, and it feels so special because if you put 100 people in a room, that would feel like a super crowded room. Well, obviously it depends on the room. You know, if you're in the O2, it would look pretty dismal. But in the room I'm in right now, if you put 100 people in here, it would be chaos. So I'm going to take it as a party. And yeah, super happy to have that century there. It's also so special because you guys are like the early adopters. You're the people that are listening to the podcast before it's massive. Also, if you've clicked onto this episode, you'll see I've got a sick thumbnail on this episode. I'm trying to get better and better, just ever so slightly from episode to episode. And this week is doing a killer thumbnail. So I hope you guys are appreciating the art decor as well. Right, this week's episode is with Ash Bhardwaj. Ash is a journalist, author of the book Why We Travel, and Army reservist. In this conversation, we talk about the neuroscience of why humans are wired to crave stories, the inner turmoil of not having a single career path, how AI gives rise to the importance of storytelling, joining the Army Reserve aged 29 and learning servant leadership, should people be holidaying in America at this time, and how social media turn travel into a performance. Hope you guys absolutely love this episode. On with the podcast. Ash, welcome to the Off Grid podcast.
Cheers, Jake. Good to see you.
Yeah, really good to have you on. And you have such a current knowledge of the world, which has made me in particular so excited for chatting to you, because I feel like it's important for me to know what the hell is going on in the world. And doing the research into this, you're clearly like a very smart, intellectual man. So looking forward to this one. It feels like at the moment we keep hearing about how AI is taking people's jobs and making many human skills obsolete, but also how that can give rise to human skills that AI can't replace as well. So what is the importance of storytelling with the rise in AI?
So I think AI is very good at certain things. It's effectively very good at processing. It's almost just maths. And when you ask AI to give you an answer to something, it predicts an answer that it thinks you're most likely to want. But it doesn't actually have intuition. And good storytelling is based on a lot of different things. One of the things that AI can probably replicate reasonably well is the structure of a good story. And this has been well documented in many different books. One of the best known of which is Joseph Campbell's A Hero with a Thousand Faces, in which he talks about the hero's journey. So what Campbell did is he looked at lots of stories throughout history, ranging from the Odyssey to the Bible. I don't think he was around before Star Wars, but Star Wars George Lucas, when he wrote Star Wars, used the template that Campbell had identified in creating a good story, following the journey of a hero. There's 12 steps. I won't go into it in detail. But I think AI could quite easily do that. However, there's this truthiness and essence and ephemeralness and a sort of connection that is vital in very good storytelling. One of the things that I do is I host The Moth, which is almost like an open mic night for storytelling in London. And people come and they tell a story. It's 5 minutes. And the really good ones just have an ability to hook into what matters to people. They make you feel connected to them. That's empathy. I'll go into a bit of the neuroscience in a minute. But there's lots of things that the good ones are doing, including responding to the way the audience is responding to them. So when I'm telling a story, I kind of pick up on how the audience is responding, and I can either ramp up the funny bits or ramp up the dramatic pauses and respond to the vibe in the room. Or when I'm hosting an entire evening, I'm thinking, okay, well, the crowd's a bit dead, right? I'll have to put in a funnier joke this time. Or put in a joke rather than just tell a story, more to the point. And so AI doesn't have that. It doesn't have that ability to understand what a human is really feeling. Perhaps the processing tools will get better at some point to be able to respond to looking at a person and getting intuition of their emotion, their interest. But AI isn't very good at that. It's also not very good at responding quickly to things without just feeding in a whole load of data. And storytelling is something that humans have actually been effectively naturally selected for. So as any species evolves, certain traits that give them competitive advantages become embedded and passed on because they have made you more likely to survive, therefore more likely to procreate, therefore your offspring are more likely to have that trait. And we know that humans have a physiological response to stories. There are certain hormones or neurotransmitters, depending on where they are in the body. If it's in your central nervous system or doing something to the nerves, it's a neurotransmitter. If it's in the blood, it's a hormone. Sometimes it's exactly the same molecules, depending on where they are. And so endorphins, for example, which we know we get from a runner's high after doing something very physically challenging, those are also released when we hear a funny story. Oxytocin, which is part of what makes us bond with other humans, and particularly the best known example of it is around birth. There's a huge flood of oxytocin, helps the mother and the child bond. And then for dads, you have to hold the baby more often to create that oxytocin for yourself. When you're listening to a story and you have a direct connection with a person, perhaps you imagine yourself in that story or you feel connected to the characters, oxytocin gets released. And the other one is dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule that your body releases to make you do something again. So if you eat fatty foods, you get dopamine to encourage you to eat more fatty foods, because when we evolved to have that system and that response, we didn't have enough calories in our diet. So there's something fatty, eat more of it so you can store some more body fat. And it's also connected to learning. So if you get a resolution to something, dopamine is released. And in the build up to the resolution of about to find an answer, dopamine is released. So stories that have jeopardy or cliffhangers or tension, that's where you get dopamine release. So we know that we've evolved effectively to tell and respond to stories. And that makes sense, right? Because as we were migrating from Southeast Africa to become the most successful species on the planet, stories were vital. We had to be able to tell our fellow tribes people, oh, look, there's a great river over there. We can go and hang out over there, and there's good food and there's water. So we need to be able to tell that story compellingly. And then as we were building bigger and bigger societies, this is something Yuval Noah Harari talks about a lot in his book, Sapiens. We had to create stories or myths or magical ideas, the idea of a nation, the notion of a tribe, the concept of money that allowed us to bond. So humans are very, very good at it, and we're very, very intuitive at it, better than you think. Just think about when you go to the pub and you tell your mates what you've been doing over the weekend. That's storytelling. Or trying to encourage them to go to watch a particular film at the cinema. That's storytelling. So that is something that I'm not sure AI will be able to replicate, certainly not that kind of rate and intuition. And there's not all humans are good at storytelling in books, right? We've all read bad stories. But I think whilst AI will be very good at just pumping out a whole load of content, it won't necessarily create the most compelling stuff. And if you really want to do something well, you require you require a high level of human input. And you can see what's happened with LinkedIn. Well, I don't know if you use LinkedIn, but there's this whole thing about AI generated copy on LinkedIn, and it feels all the same and it doesn't have soul. So I think storytelling will always hold a place. And stories make us do incredible things. They shape our beliefs. So the stories that we grow up with, which nation we're from, shapes our ideas about what matters to us. That shapes our behaviors, and that shapes what we choose to do, behaviors. That shapes the outcomes of what we experience. And then stories shape how we interpret those outcomes, which shapes our identity as an individual and as part of a culture. So it shapes our culture. So stories are extremely powerful, and they're not just things that we do to entertain each other or encourage our mates to go to the pub. And I think that will be hard for AI to get right, as we've seen with LinkedIn. It's just like, oh, I'm not going to read that. It's trash. It's obviously AI generated.
And your skills that you have at the moment in terms of public speaking, storytelling, and also building relationships and going onto TV and things like this. Those seem to be like the skills that are now coming through with AI taking over a lot of the kind of more systematic process driven roles where we're hearing about companies having like max exodus of like grad schemes and things like that because a lot of the admin and lower level roles can just be replaced simply by using an AI agent or building their own AI tools. Do you feel like these skills that you've been able to develop over your career will start to see like an increase in value as AI becomes more and more part of our everyday lives?
Well, I hope so. Otherwise, I'll be out of a job and I won't be able to pay my rent. You're right about AI being used for process-driven stuff, and the the potential opportunity is that we will then liberate humans to be able to focus on the more creative, intuitive, meaningful stuff. And I do think it's a shame that we're just seeing AI being used to generate. Well, I'll give you an example. AI is being used to generate films, and you see people saying, "Oh, look, this is just as good as Marvel." And my instinct is that some of the later Marvel films, in particular, have become so formulaic, and the CGI just looks so CGI, and it could be anywhere that it just starts to become meaningless compared to some of the early ones. So fine, if you can get it to create CGI, that's fine. But the story beneath it still really matters. You still really need that human thing. In terms of the things I do, I think I've really started to enjoy live radio, live television. Like I do BBC One now, I do Monocle Radio. And that ability to respond to an unexpected question, having the dynamism to do it and having the background knowledge is a skill I've developed. But I think that's something that's appreciated. And you see a greater want for IRL, in real life activities. People spend so much time behind their screens that they're looking more for more direct human connection. So if you have someone that can facilitate an event, like I do with the Moth, or someone that can lead you on an expedition and tell stories, doesn't matter how challenging the expedition is, but it's helping you feel your place within that. You know, you could go and walk. I don't know, you could go and walk the Kumano Kodo Trail in Japan, like I did last year. 3 days, depending on which route you do. Say it's 5 days. Lovely to look at, beautiful landscape. You could just walk that on your own and you'd still have a lovely time. If you're with someone who's able to tell you the story about where that trail came from, what does this mean? Why does this tea house have an interesting history? What happened here? What does this combination of river and rock and land and air and trees mean to the people who went on pilgrimage there? Then you have a greater sense of presence and part in it. So that's where the storytelling and the skills will become really useful beyond AI in the process driven. And we see this in the military as well. So, the use of AI in the military is controversial, but one of the things that you can do with it is you can use it to do, when you're trying to plan and do decision making, you can use AI to do all the mathematical process driven stuff. That would ideally mean that those well trained officers or senior soldiers who have had years of experience thinking about things can then make the important decisions. So AI has generated all of the target data, what you could do, then a human should be the one making the decision about whether or not to act on it. That's its use in AI. So that's an example of where you can increase the processing and speed stuff, but also leave some of it over to humans.
You said that I've realized that good travel is less about what we do and more about knowing our own reasons for doing it. Can we
Mm.
expand a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can think about this just in your own conversations with other people. So if you're someone that does adventures, right, that's something that you enjoy. You've developed that interest over time. Right? Maybe it was DAV or Scouts at school, and eventually you've done more and more and more. And now hiking to every space camp is something you want to do, as an example, right? For other people who've never had those early experiences, that would just be something they have no interest in doing. And they'd say, I just want to go shopping in Dubai as their holiday, right? So I'll come on to ethically good travel in a moment. But in terms of for the individual, what is fulfilling? So it's what do you need at that particular moment, and what are the things you can do to fulfill it? The example I give is the three most fulfilling travel experiences of my life. Three of the most fulfilling were serving with the British Army Reserve in Estonia, doing the deterrence work there. doing the long form expeditions where I was doing the travel writing and filmmaking. So Uganda, Sudan, Kashmir, other parts of the Himalayas, and going raving in Ibiza. Now, all three of those were extremely fulfilling, and I loved them all. And they're all things that changed my life, from stories, to a sense of service, to just having a huge amount of fun in Ibiza. But if I'd have gone to Ibiza hoping to have a sense of service and find good storytelling, I'd be sorely disappointed. I had a brilliant time raving, but that was it. If I wanted to have a huge amount of hedonism and joy and fun, and I went on a British Army exercise, again, I'd be sorely disappointed. So neither one of those are better. It's just, what do you need at that time and then fit into it? So that's what I mean by good travel. Just understand your own motivations and then finding the mechanism of travel that will enable the outcome that you want to fulfill that motivation. There's a separate thing, which is the ethics of travel, in terms of, is it really fulfilling? So shopping, for example, often that is just a way of distracting from deep-rooted psychological challenges and a need to hold things. And the second one is, are you damaging the places that you're visiting? And we know about carbon footprints from air travel, but then is the type of tourism you're doing damaging for the local community? And you've got like really obviously criminal, malign, awful stuff like child sexual exploitation that we find in places around the world, and many tourism places. Cambodia had a massive issue with it. Thailand had an issue with it. Kenya, that is obviously bad when people are going there to do that. That's criminal and immoral. And then there's things that we are unaware that our behavior is damaging the place, like the huge number of people visiting Venice, making it very difficult for the locals to have their own life there, the Disneyfication and commodification of the culture. So that's where your choices in travel can do good or bad for the place that you're visiting. At the same time, tourism does a huge amount of good for destinations because it puts money into the local community, so long as you're staying with local people rather than staying in a hotel where all the revenue leaves the country. So those are the sorts of, that's the knowledge that is, I think, harder for most people to become aware of. That's what I write about why we travel. How do you start to fulfill that? How do you make it work for yourself?
I saw a recent Instagram post of yours captioned, "Should you cancel your holiday to the USA?" It feels like it relates to this.
Yeah, the thing about whether or not you should travel to the USA, there's a couple of different things. So one reason people say that they don't want to travel to the USA is they say, well, I don't want to be supporting the United States administration. And the reality is the Trump administration don't care whether or not you go to the United States. They're not gonna change their behavior because fewer people are going to the United States. It turns out that the places that are quite resilient are the places like New York and Florida. People are still going there anyway. The places that are suffering more are the second and third destinations. So, you know, the Navajo Nation in the southern part of the United States, indigenous cultural tourism, Oregon in the northwest United States. So these are places which are not pro-Trump, right? They're places where your tourism revenue is, particularly in the case of the Navajo Nation, supporting the people who've been oppressed and exploited for centuries, and your tourism money is really helping them. Or Oregon, which is an amazing state with such diversity and amazing landscapes and brilliant things to do. So it's those places that are suffering. So by people saying, well, I'm not going to go to the United States because of Trump, the people that don't care, just want to see New York and just go to Florida, they're still going to go. And that's what Trump can talk about. That's what he can trumpet. That's the first thing to consider. The second is it a good bet to go to the United States at the moment? Because there's just been all the stories in the news of people's visa waivers being cancelled. So you get this thing called an ESTA when you go to the United States. You don't need to apply for a tourism visa, usually. And that's been withdrawn at the last minute for people going to the Football World Cup. Now, one of the reasons they would withdraw it is you hadn't put all your information on the visa waiver, that kind of thing. But it's just like, well, if I've planned that time and spent that money and there's a chance it'll fall through at the last minute, why would I go to the United States? I'll just go somewhere else. And then there's just the more like the build-up of things about how you feel about the US, like what Trump has been saying about Greenland, what he's been doing with Ukraine, ICE in the United States, the murder of innocent people, the deportation of people who actually, in many cases, still have the right to be there. And for tourism, you can literally go anywhere in the world. It's not like I have to get on a particular train line. I don't have a choice if I'm going to Oxford. I have to take GWR. That's the only choice I have. But if I'm actually going to North London, I could take the tube or the bus, or I could cycle. So if I've got something, if I really hate the tube for whatever reason, I can take the bus or the tube, bus or cycle. The United States has the same issue. If people just sort of change their sentiment towards the US, go to Canada, go to Mexico, go to New Zealand, go to France, go to Spain, and that's the issue the United States has at the moment.
Do you think that there's power in regular tourists choosing where they go on holiday? I'm just thinking on like an economic basis. Is if you're thinking that the Trump administration aren't bothered by it, surely they're losing a lot of money by people choosing not to go. And if so, does that give like the regular tourist this kind of sense of empowerment?
Uh, I mean, like I said, I don't think Trump cares whether or not I go to I go to the United States. So you can feel powerful if you want. I mean, tourism is the one of the best export economies you can have, because it is an export industry, because people are taking money from their country and spending it in yours. I mean, that's exactly what countries are trying to do more of. So it's foolish from an economic standpoint to risk that. And the United States tourism economy is suffering. Businesses are going out of business. People are losing jobs. There's less money coming to the US because of all those things. And so I think it's silly, but this is also an administration that cut US aid, cut the Voice of America, which was the most powerful soft influence tool that the world has, and it has instead built a ballroom. So I don't really think his judgment on these things are coherent, and I don't think he cares.
What was that about the Voice of America? What was that?
So Voice of America, you've heard of the BBC World Service.
Yeah.
So America had a similar thing called Voice of America, which basically was broadcasting in English to places that would otherwise be beyond the reach of American media. It used to be the Soviet Union, Southeast Asia, communist countries, now Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, places where the US would have wanted to have created soft power and influence and counter authoritarian regimes. And Trump basically shut it down last year. And it's not quite the same as the BBC World Service, but it's kind of similar. Not as trusted as the BBC World Service, but it was one of the most effective. There's a court challenge going through that means it might come back, but it bang for its buck. It did a lot of soft power influence for the United States around the world, and it was cut. And I can't remember what its entire budget was, but as I understand it, what's the cost of the ballroom in the White House? Like a couple of billion. I mean, it's crazy.
Wow. Okay. Do you know any speculation on why they cut it?
Well, it's not so much speculation. They were quite clear on why they cut it. They believed that it was counter to US national interests, and they believed there were a whole load of programs that were cut when Trump 2 came in, but which was part of the Doge thing that Elon Musk was doing, trying to reduce government spending, and they just decided that that wasn't a good spend. But it was quite politicized within that. So that was the top line. There wasn't good return on investment for American expenditure. But yeah, same with tourism. You're damaging tourism revenue. That's probably not good for America in the long term. And soft power has a real capability. Soft power is a story, right? Going back to the point about storytelling. What is America? What is Europe? What is Britain? The way we are perceived around the world has an influence on how much influence these nations have, what we can do, what our capabilities are. And if you damage that, it's quite hard to redress it.
You describe travel marketing, places like the media and social media in particular, as hedonistic. What do you think people get wrong about travel through that form of marketing?
Yeah, so I mean, this is related to the stories. And if you think about it, what are elective travel, traveling by choice, so going on holiday, or rather than having to go for migration, or you're having to move because of war, or those sorts of reasons, it's really new. We haven't done it for very long. And it required new technology, it's required reduction in poverty so more people can afford it, but it also required stories. And the first tourists were from the UK, from England as it was the grand tourists. So these were basically aristocratic Brits, Scots as well, traveling around Europe, going to visit things. like going to see art, going to see ruins, going to see volcanoes and landscapes. And they wrote books about their journeys, and then other people read those books and went to try and replicate it. I mean, the fact that actually most of the books are less about self-development and cultural knowledge and more about drinking and shagging tells you a bit more about what was actually motivating the people who followed them to go on. And maybe that's set a precedent for British tourism ever since. And then with the Industrial Revolution, people started to get time off work. They started to get given workers' rights, and then they take a break from work, from the factories or mills or the mines, and they'd go and visit the British seaside towns. So tourism became about rest and relaxation. And then with the arrival of the fly and flop, which is where you fly somewhere very cheaply and flop down on a beach, that was kind of taken to those places. And it's about hedonism, rest and relaxation, and fun. And so, because that was all the stories that existed, and that's all we knew about, and that's all that was available, because that's the only products that were being sold, all travel marketing was about hedonism, rest, relaxation, and fun, avoidance of avoidance of pain and pursuit of pleasure. That's what hedonism is. And so that's what was marketed to us. So we didn't hear the other stories about the journey itself being a challenge and helping you develop as yourself and discovering yourself, or developing empathy by understanding other cultures, or experiencing wonder, having wonder that allowed you to experience it all. And those are stories that started to come about through the hippie trail and backpacking. And those stories were told through books like Shantaram or The Beach or the film The Beach. And then with the arrival of television shows like Race Across the World, we have an entirely new story, which is about the journey itself being accessible to everybody. And the challenge of the journey itself is what makes it worthwhile. And then connection with the people that you're traveling with and the people that you meet. So these were things that people knew about, but often in fairly small populations. Like not everybody knew about it. But when I went backpacking in 2000, I think I was the only person in my sixth form that did it. And now you're unusual if you don't try and visit 200 countries in the world. I don't know about 200 countries, but you know what I mean? There's this sort of competitiveness in which I think we are losing the essence of what we were doing it for. It becomes performative now. So it's not just about who you become, but it's about who you tell other people that you are becoming. So there's almost this peak of what travel was doing for people, but as it has become more social media driven and more social media learned, we're learning it through social media, it's changing what travel is again.
So what was that? It's not who you become, but it's who you tell other people you're becoming.
So yeah, so rather than exactly. So rather than when no social media existed, when you traveled, maybe you tell your mates in the pub back home, but it was very much just about experiencing what you're experiencing along the way. And often that was not always fun. You know, you miss a bus, you can't find somewhere to sleep, get D&V, diarrhea and vomiting. There's all these things that don't go well. But you take a few photos and that would be about it, really. Whereas now the constant documentation of putting it on social media, it becomes performative. You know, and I'm guilty of this as well. Part of my work involves sticking stuff online on social media, partly to ensure that I maintain visibility amongst the people that might give me work. And also because metrics of how many people follow you matters in everything from TV to branded content. So there's huge opportunity, but it does mean that your travel no longer is just about your own individual experience. It's about demonstrating to others and your audience that you are a person of value because you are doing these things.
I can definitely see that taking shape in today's world. And also when it comes to labels around, like you mentioned, the grand tourist of the time, and now we have like the backpacker and the adventurer. But I know that you reject the word explorer. How come you reject that word?
I I find elements of being an explorer interesting, which is that what is an explorer? An explorer, I mean, the definition around this is that, which is an academic definition, partly. An explorer is the first person from a culture or society to go somewhere and bring back new stories from that place. So that the next group that follows on, which in the academic definition is the traveler, knows that a place exists, knows what is there, knows what the possibilities are, but then goes there and does things in that place that have not been commodified for tourism. You're simply doing what the people of that place do. And then the tourism goes to replicate the stories of the traveler, of the things that have been done. And that is when the experiences in a destination move from something that serves purely the locals and exists as a part of culture and society and becomes a commodity that you can purchase and you perform a Disneyfied version of it. That makes sense. Not the original version. We're doing like a version that's sanitized for tourism. So that's the thing. So, explorer is, the first person to go somewhere and tell the stories of the place. It does have the weight of colonialism and exploitation to it, in the sense of the traditional explorers would go places and come back with knowledge. But often that was effectively being the recce party for the people that then come on and extract the resources and exploit a place. So there's that weight of it that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Also, all the places that I'm going are places where people live. Now, unless you're going to Antarctica, you're going somewhere that is already known and is somebody's home. I guess Antarctica is the home of penguins and some scientists, but it's slightly dismissive of the people who have already spent millennia building a culture in a place. There is the sense that I guess I'm doing some sort of cultural and journalistic exploration. So when I did the New Iron Curtain, which was this 6-month, 8,500-kilometer journey along the now Russian NATO border, at that time Finland wasn't in NATO, I was finding and telling stories that absolutely did not exist in the wider British discussion. Some of them existed in academic circles. Now they're very familiar to us. Russian information operations, subversion, culture, identity, disinformation, misinformation. But to an extent, I was an explorer then, in that I was going places that were not often visited by people like me to find stories to tell at home. So that was to that extent, I guess you could call me an explorer, but it's also become a synonym for adventure, like going to somewhere and doing something a bit challenging. I walked through Oman with Levison Wood. Could I call myself an explorer? Well, definitely not, because the tribes people of that region have been walking that route for centuries, if not millennia, and they were guiding us through there. So was I exploring? Well, no, not really. I was telling stories, but yeah. So I think it's, for me, it's often a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and it's it's nice to get into it, because I think a lot of people who do travel the world perhaps don't really know what category they're in when they are traveling.
So I think it's also interesting about the fact that we care about that, right? And
Yeah,
one of my pet hates is when people say, I'm not a tourist, I'm a traveler." It's like, right, so do you live here? No. Do you speak the language? No. Are you staying in a place? Are you staying in someone's home? Have you rented? Are you living with a family? No. Well, you're a tourist then, right? If it may be that you're traveling cheaply or for a long period of time, or you're not staying in a resort, but you're still a tourist because you're visiting somewhere to gain an experience to go home. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's this weird thing where people feel the need to, and again, it's this performative thing about how you want to be viewed outside. I'm not a tourist, I'm a traveler. No, that's okay to be a tourist. And going back to that academic definition, a traveler is someone who's going to a place where there's really no stories told about how you can consume a culture before. And that's also okay.
yeah. Maybe we don't need the labels at all. You can just pursue what interests you. One really interesting part about your story, which I feel gives such a rounder perspective to all your experiences abroad, is your military experience. And you didn't join the army initially because I read that you thought the Iraq war was unjust, but you did join eventually. So what changed?
It wasn't so much that I felt the Iraq war was unjust. It was that when that was starting to happen, because I'd really passed my regular commission board, as it was back then, to go to Sandhurst and join the regular army. It was more that I was having far too much fun being a ski instructor and living in New Zealand and just enjoying what I was doing and doing all of the journalism. There's more of a choice at that point. I mean, I think we can reflect now and acknowledge that the justifications for going to war in Iraq were based on false information or misinterpreted information about weapons of mass destruction. And I think we can look at what happened afterwards with Daesh, ISIS, and see that we didn't improve stability or security. And certainly with the Iranian influence that then took over Iraq, I don't think it really helped us or the people of the region or anyone really. So I think it's a fairly acceptable to say that it was a mistake now, that choice to go to war in Iraq. And I was in my mid 2010s, I'd kind of been doing journalism and other things, and I still had this itch for going to do service about doing something more purposeful than myself, rather than just pursuing what mattered to me. And so I joined the Army Reserve, went to Sandhurst, and then eventually joined the Rifles, which is an infantry unit. And I think joining the Army Reserve, I was 29 when I joined, was the best choice I've made in my adult life. Until I said yes to my wife when she proposed to me. That was definitely the best choice. But the things that it gave me a structure, something that I had to do. I had to turn up on Tuesdays, I had to go on the weekends, I had to be fit. So it gave me some external discipline that became self-discipline. It gave me a sense of doing something beyond myself, like the notion of doing it for the nation or the regiment, or once I became an officer, looking after 30 soldiers in my platoon. And the sense of what the army calls servant leadership, doing something so that whatever you do is so that they are able to do what they need to do, and through that you achieve the task. And also this notion of tolerance of discomfort, the fact that when you go and do an exercise, it's really, really hard and it's miserable often. And you're like, it's wet, it's cold, I'm lost. And that comfort of being uncomfortable and being okay with being uncomfortable is an extremely good trait to develop. Also, particularly at Sandhurst at the beginning, you're sent out to do these things and you've only been there a few weeks, and they'll say, right, lead the platoon to capture that position. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is incredibly stressful. I've read my papers and I know the process to go through, but this, I'm not really sure what to do here. But you figure out a way through it. You know the structure, and then, of course, over time you get better, and by the time you leave, you are able to do it. But getting used to those sensations of discomfort and tolerating it is really useful. And I've just then been able to apply that in other parts of my life. And also, the skills of navigation and like combat camping effectively, and all these things that you learn whilst you're there are extremely applicable for travel and everything else. And it's given me knowledge and insight into an institution that I found really valuable. And it was going to Estonia in 2017 and becoming curious about why we were there as part of this deterrence force that led me to do the New Iron Curtain. So it gave me triggers of interest in things. But ultimately, I think that idea of having something more important than yourself, in terms of looking after soldiers and doing a duty for the nation and creating a sense of security for the nation, I alone am not the reason that the United Kingdom is safe, but I'm part of a machine that helps create that.
And for you, you mentioned earlier that Estonia was one of those life-changing trips for you, going out with the Army Reserve. What was it about that trip that was so influential on your life?
Estonia is a country that had been occupied by Russia many times and like terribly treated in the past, and they're very proud of their identity and their freedom, and they really want to keep it. And they are very aware that their neighbor from across the border wants to take it from them. And just being aware of gratitude for what we already have and the security we already have as a nation, but also just becoming aware of how a malign neighbor was doing that, which was using information operations and Russian language media and creating provocations and sending in agent provocateurs to create unrest. Just being aware that this was going on, that made me journalistically curious. And that's what led to me starting to research strategic communications and information operations more, and then do this 6-month journey that led me from the top of Norway to Russian occupied Crimea. So it was being in that place. There is this NATO deterrence force that made me curious and put up my journalistic interest that led to me going off to find that story.
One side topic that I read about and that you mentioned a little bit earlier was that you met Levison Wood when you were at university.
Yeah.
He recently came onto the show and we had a good chat about like his time through his 20s as well. But I was just wondering what uni was like when you guys were together there before your careers had started.
So more widely at university, I would say I didn't make the most out of my first couple of years. I don't think I was comfortable in my skin, and I think I was doing a sort of externally performative version of having fun, just going out getting drunk all the time, and lead, that kind of thing. Met some really great people like Lev, who I have shared interests with, and then went off to do things with. Not to say that I didn't have loads of fun in those first couple of years. And then in my final year, weirdly, the thing that changed the most was acting. I did like amateur dramatic society, and then I just met an entirely new group of people, and was aware how much I'd been limiting my opportunity at university, limiting my own horizons, and the kind of things I could do, the kind of music nights I went to, which was actually much more similar to the kind of things I was interested in as a teenager. And for 2 years, I'd kind of put myself into this jock rail track. And then I just discovered this whole new side. I didn't take up acting as a career. I think it would be even more challenging than journalism. But I've found that diversity really, really useful. And so that's what I liked about university. And yeah, and Lev and I stayed mates, and then he went off to join the regular army when I went off to go and do ski instructing and all those sorts of things. And then years later, when I was already doing bits of travel journalism, and he was leaving the army and looking at doing more of that sort of thing, he got in touch again and asked to catch up. And he's obviously made a better go of it than I have.
Well, you've both gone on to do incredible things in the world. And one thing I really wanted to ask was at that time that you were both at uni, could you have guessed what you were both going to go on to do in the world?
Well, Lev was already in the officer training corps at university, and I think he was very committed at that point. That was his plan. He was going to go and join the army. I don't think he knew he'd go on to do that other stuff afterwards, but he'd already done like lots of overland experiences when he was 19, and then he went off to go and do some more when he was older after university. So I think that was definitely set with him then. I think me personally, like I loved storytelling. I'd already started to become very much in love with travel. I hadn't developed really an interest in expedition at that point, or like real adventure, or challenged myself in that way. That came when I lived in New Zealand. That I became interested in multi-day hikes, and then everything from there. Yeah, I was still very uncertain in university about what I would go on to do afterwards. To an extent, I still am now. I've never been someone that's had a particularly clear path, or even a job or a career. And by the time I finished living in New Zealand and so on, it was 2008. So the job market was not something that was easy to get into, and that's how I ended up doing more storytelling and other things like that to pass the time between ski seasons, really. But it was those later experiences of skiing and hiking and everything else that made me think, oh, the outdoors is somewhere I want to be, and then finding a way to blend the two of them together with telling stories whilst doing challenging expeditions and experiences. But undoubtedly, it was going off to do stuff with Lev in the time after he left the army that really cemented that. He had that interest in adventure, and the sort of romantic Victorian explorers were the ones that really inspired him. And for me, it was much more modern stories that had inspired me. And I ended up doing that mix of current affairs and travel, but using expedition to bring it to make it happen.
I'm definitely one of those people as well that never really quite knows what they're doing in their career or what job they're doing, and just the inner turmoil that can create when you're in your 20s as well.
Well,
Um,
it's awful, Jake. It's a really difficult thing to sit with, and it's not a nice feeling. And I think all of the discussions around AI and so on make that even more challenging, right? And even more unsettling, as well as the sort of stuff about war with Iran, potential war with Russia. All of these things make us unsettled. I feel very much that position now. And last few weeks I've really struggled. I've had a lot of professional rejection for things that I thought were going to succeed. ideas, projects, and they've fallen through. And it like psychologically, I've been really, really struggling. So it's not easy, and I don't have an answer for you. I lecture in journalism, and the thing I say to the students there is, look, you don't need to know what you're doing now. You don't need to know what you're going to be doing in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. You need to know what you'll be okay with now. They can help you build the skills and expose you to things that you might then want to pursue. Just as taking up amateur dramatics at uni introduced me to a whole new subculture and a whole new bunch of people that really broadened my experience and helped me figure out who I am. And if it's like, storytelling, podcasting, you're interested in stories, you've done good research. So there's a journalistic possibility there, finding some kind of organization that wants some form of content creation, interviews, writing, video, whatever it is. Just do it for a little while until you figure out what you want to do next. That's okay. You don't have to always be like, right, I'm going to become, I don't know, the presenter of a Discovery television series. So here's the steps I need to take. I don't think that really exists anymore. I think it's that kind of career progression exists even less than it ever did.
I find that so refreshing to hear that you're also going through that as well. Because I got to admit, before this conversation, doing the research, it was almost intimidating the amount of different topics I could have covered with you, and particularly with how you're able to speak really well and sound super intelligent. I was almost like, oh my God, I need to be like smarter to be able to kind of get on this level. And then to hear that you're going through similar struggles of like finding your way in the world, and this is all of our first shot at life and all of that. It's like, oh whoa, okay. Is there ever a point where you're like, yeah, this is what I'm doing, or is the beauty in being able to kind of choose?
Hmm. I mean, I suspect I would be happier if I at least had a greater level of financial stability and something that I could just plug along with that I enjoy. I mean, there's a Japanese term, isn't there, called like, is it kaizen? But it's the intersection of what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. I think the term's kaizen, and I think it's trying to
Yes.
figure that out. Um, I've nearly had it a few times. One of the professional rejections recently was for some work that would have been enduring and continuous. That I don't. I think maybe a couple of dozen other people would be able to do, but based on what this as you talk about, this like random background that I have, that I would have been able to connect, and it didn't come through. So I think it's choice is good, but when you feel that you have no choice and you're not able to get the things that you need, particularly financially, that's tough.
Yeah. It's very good to hear. I think there'll be so many people listening to this who are in a similar position, and they'll probably definitely know that they're interested in the outdoors and adventure, but knowing like where to go with that route can sometimes be a really tricky one.
And something else I say is, people say, I really want to be a travel journalist. I'm like, do you want to be a travel journalist, or do you want to travel? And those are two different things. And it's the same with the outdoors. Do you want to make your career out of the outdoors, or do you want to spend time in the outdoors? And for people who want to travel, or people who want to spend time in the outdoors, perhaps the best thing to do is find a job that you can work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that you can tolerate or you enjoy enough, and then use the time and money that generates to do the things you really want to do. Because I'm now in a position where if I write a piece for one of the papers, I can get a free trip to, like, supported by PR, because I'm then writing about it to most places I want to go in the world. But that doesn't pay my rent, and that doesn't pay my daughter's nursery fees, that doesn't pay for the supermarket. It's my son.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get keys.
Hey,
So my
dude.
wife's just here. And that's my son making noise. Bye, I love you. He's 5 months old. Bye,
Wow.
Avo. Love you.
So you've got a son and your daughter as well, right, Lyra?
Yeah, yeah.
What do you
Lyra's
want for your children?
what do I want? I would like them to have. Um, I mean, the easy driver when you become a parent is what are the things that you didn't have and what are the things that you did have. So what didn't I have? Didn't have financial security at home. Didn't have a father that was ever present. I mean, I haven't provided them like clear financial security yet, but I managed to put some money in a junior ISA for them, and we're okay here. And my wife has a proper job; she's a doctor. But I'm always there for them. You know, I have the option to go traveling all the time, but as well as the fact that it doesn't pay, I want to be around with my kids and my wife because I love them and I like them. And then the other thing is, I can take them to do some of those things with me. Like I can take them hiking or take them on adventures or take them to a new country from time to time. And that can be really rewarding for them. But really, they just need the love and support and attention that I can give them. You know, I'm constantly reading parenting books, which are actually some of the best leadership training I've ever had. And that's all I can really do for them. Doesn't really matter what I want for them, so long as I have given them the best support that I can have for them to become who they are, or who they choose to be, and have the options that they can have. And I'm not going to be able to send them to private school or be able to buy them an expensive car. But having met extremely wealthy kids through some of the other parts of work that I've done, it seems that financial security doesn't generate happiness or contentment. Um, I would hope that they start to develop the same curiosity and interest in other cultures and other places and tolerance of discomfort and adventure that I've had, and maybe a sense of duty and service. I'm in the Army Reserve, journalism is a sense of duty, and my wife is a doctor. So I imagine some of those characteristics will infuse into them as well.
Ash, thanks so much for coming on and being able to share your opinion on the world. I think that's something that it's quite hard to find these days. Someone who has an opinion, who has a point of view, and you're able to communicate it so eloquently. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks, Jake. I mean, I can only reflect on my own experiences. It's I'm surprised that you want to hear the rules of the world by Ash, but there we are.
And of course, you got your book, Why We Travel. For people who have made it this far in the conversation, what can they expect from the book and what's it all about?
So the book helps you understand what's making us all travel. Stories, the fact there are different motivations, and we've talked a lot about stories today, and most of the reasons why we travel because of the stories that we've heard, and then the things that we know exist is how we fulfill those motivations. So I think hopefully the book introduces some ideas of travel that people may not have had before. It will help them reflect on how to make those things possible for themselves. It might make them think about more ethical forms of travel, those things I talked about earlier about, if you're going to go to Barcelona, how do you travel in a way that is not damaging to Barcelona? If you're traveling to Central or South America, how can you spend your money in a way that helps the people of that country rather than just an investment company? Um, uh, there's a lot of memoir in it as well. That's got a lot of stories. There's this whole piece about grief, how I cope with loss of parents. And I think that might give people some consolation or some thoughts about how do they deal with difficult times. That's what I hope the book gives for them.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, mate.